I think we should look at this chart. This chart shows the budget of the US government agency called Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. You can see that they're pretty well funded, around $10 billion a year. I looked up this chart because ICE has been in the news recently.
ICE agents detained some 1,600 illegal migrants on Tuesday.
Raided this meatpacking plant.
Rounding up workers.
20 to
more than 100 people
detained without explanation.
Into handcuffs.
And taken to detention centers.
ICE is a kind of immigration police. And long before Donald Trump, at the very beginning of when ICE was created in the early 2000s, the agency had a very ambitious goal: to deport everyone they possibly could, to, quote, remove all removable aliens. They share the same parent agency as Customs and Border Protection, which focuses on the border. ICE focuses on all of this: the interior.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials wasting little time under the new administration.
Arrested nearly 1,200.
Large-scale immigration
Building was surrounded by federal agents.
Different targets on
Of
this
immigrants
one.
detained over this past
9 single adult females, 4 female heads of household.
5 members of his congregation detained.
And if you look at this line, you will see that indeed ICE arrests have spiked since Trump took office. And a big way that the new Trump administration has sold this surge in deportations is crime.
Murderers, drug dealers,
Violent criminals and vicious gangs.
we have to get all of these criminals.
known terrorists.
A lot of the public messaging from the new Trump administration focuses on immigrants who are criminals.
The American people don't want these criminals and dangerous individuals on our streets anymore.
But let's separate this line into 3. This color is immigrants who are convicted criminals. This line is arrests of people with pending criminal charges. And this line is ICE arrests of people with no criminal record at all. This is the steepest line of all. So, what's going on here? That's what I'm setting out to understand by making this video. What does all of this represent? And if Trump has been able to do all of this with ICE's current budget, what happens next year when Congress has set ICE's budget to look more like this?
A major infusion of funding to carry out President Trump's deportation agenda.
Most intense spending spree on immigration enforcement in modern history
of the United States of America.
More than most other countries' military budgets.
What does ICE plan to do with all that new taxpayer funding?
To understand all of this, I've been talking to immigration experts and lawyers. I've reached out to people in my community who are facing deportation and threat of being detained by ICE.
Yo pedí permiso en mi trabajo. A mi jefe le dije que no podía ir a trabajar porque no sé, me sentía tan insegura, con miedo.
When I lived in Tijuana for 2 years, I heard a lot of stories of people who were deported. I've worked closely with people here in the United States who are undocumented or unauthorized, but who have been here for decades. And I wanted to understand their perspective as well. There's so much more to the immigration system than ICE. And eventually I want to make a broader video about immigration in America more generally. But today I'm focusing on ICE. Now, reporting on this is really challenging right now because it's so divisive and emotional and charged. Clarity and multiple perspectives is vital, which is why I am partnering with today's sponsor, Ground News, who I want to tell you briefly about. I use their app and site to pull thousands of stories from all around the world and synthesize them all in one place. I can search a story and then sort it by political bias, by reliability, by who owns the outlet. News coverage these days is fragmented and confusing, and often the loudest voice wins. And so having a place where you can synthesize all the news stories in one place and see like an X-ray vision of what's behind these stories is incredibly useful. This is one reason why Ground News was recognized by the Nobel Peace Center for improving media literacy. And if you want to see how it worked on this story specifically, just watch what happens when I type in ICE. Ground News shows me all of these different stories and how they're covering them and where they fall on the political spectrum. I can quickly see that a right-leaning outlet like Fox News, which is owned by the Murdoch family, frames their headline about Trump's new funding and recruitment for ICE as crucial. It emphasizes the defend the homeland components of the recruiting campaign. And on the same screen, I can see that NBC News, which tends to lean left, frames this recruiting campaign as poaching local officers and how it's provoking anger among sheriffs of local police departments. Both of these headlines are true. They're just framed differently, and oftentimes the framing of a controversial issue can have more impact than the facts themselves. Ground News allows me to get this kind of transparency into coverage unlike anywhere else. There's no corporate influence on Ground News. It's completely funded by subscribers like you and me. There's a bunch of other features and tools in Ground News. When you get the Vantage plan, which is the one I have, you can get all of those. And Ground News is giving 40% off on that plan to viewers of the channel. Just go to my link. It's groundnews.com/Johnny Harris. You can also just conveniently scan this QR code if that's easier for you. I think it's like $5 a month in total, so pretty affordable to be informed. I'm really grateful that Ground News exists, that they support our channel, that they are helping create more transparency in media during this wild time. Okay, with that, let's get back to the video, and I want to introduce you to a friend of mine.
I was born in El Salvador. I came to California in '93. Okay. I was 8 years old.
That's Daniel. He's about my age. For most of his life, he's lived in the United States, actually right here in the DC area where I live.
I learned to do carpentry. I learned electrical, I learned HVAC. I started my own company. Well, I had up to 4 employees working for me.
Daniel's story is one of thousands that are happening right now in this country, and we're gonna get back to it once we better understand the mechanics of our system. For now, I'll tell you that this summer, Daniel was deported.
When Trump was saying that he was gonna deport illegal criminals, it really didn't bother me because I was legal and I felt like I was gonna be okay.
His story will make a lot more sense once we understand the basics of how immigration enforcement works in this country. Immigrants. Often they are talked about in one of two statuses: foreign-born people who are here legally or illegally, and that there's some clear line between them. But that's not actually how it is. There's actually a whole rainbow of types of statuses that immigrants can have. Some people born outside the United States become US citizens. Naturalized is what we call it. And then on the other side, you have undocumented or unauthorized immigrants, here without permission. And then you have all of this in between, like immigrants who lack documentation but do have the government's permission to be here. They're typically waiting for some sort of court hearing, like the many people seeking asylum. There are other people who are in the United States that are here legally but temporarily, like for example, someone here on a visa. And then there's lawful permanent residents. They're not citizens, but they're allowed to be here long term. We call them green card holders. And by the way, we kind of made up this visual. This is a simplified, fairly simplistic version of all of the different immigration statuses. It's actually way more complicated and convoluted. Anyone who's in the middle of that process knows that immigration in the United States is a fairly broken and out-of-date thing, even for those who are here legally. And everyone kind of agrees on that. Republicans, Democrats. Congress may change it someday with new laws, but for now, we're stuck with old laws, and it's up to the president to enforce those laws in different ways. But for now, we'll work with this. Because Daniel, for most of his life, was here on this chart. He was a lawful permanent resident, a green card holder. So that's the first big thing that is happening here in the new administration, is that while immigration enforcement has focused a lot on these illegal statuses, people up here also have a place in this new crackdown. Each group here represents millions of people. And the people down here that don't have legal status represent somewhere between 10 and 15 million people. Let's answer the first big question, which is, how did most of these people end up living here? Now, we could start this story anywhere in American history because America is a story of just waves of immigrants. But for our purposes here, let's start in like the early 20th century, early 1900s. Look at the Western United States. There's a lot of land out here, but there are not a lot of people.
The need for workers for the economy is a persistent theme in American immigration history.
So once or twice a year, the farms here need a lot of workers to help them harvest and process a huge amount of food that's grown here. That need for seasonal, temporary labor is filled by Mexican workers for a lot of decades. Laborers who come up just to work for the season and then return back home after their work is done. And for a lot of the 20th century, this is actually legal. The US encourages it with a specific program because they know that the US economy needs it. This flow of seasonal migrant labor, mostly from Mexico, fuels entire industries in the United States who rely on workers coming from Mexico to do this essential low-wage work and then returning back home for the season. If you live in the United States and you eat lettuce in the winter, it is almost 100% certain that that lettuce came from around here, and it was very likely harvested by migrant labor. Okay, so let's get back to the early 20th century. There are Mexican workers coming up for the season, and this is totally legal. But then in the 60s, that changes. Congress does its job. It used to do its job back in the 60s and pass laws that they negotiated and compromised and actually bipartisan laws. And they end this program, in part because labor unions and rights groups saw it as abusive and exploitative.
There was a lot of very well-documented and well-known labor abuse that took place.
And partly because some economists were arguing that bringing in all of this low-wage labor made wages lower for everyone, and that instead, American labor should go fill those farm jobs.
The constant flow of foreign workers into the available pool of domestic workers.
And so the Congress doesn't actually implement any immigration law that will allow low-wage workers to come into the country legally. They want Americans to fill those jobs. And the Congress is kind of running a big experiment, a big test. If they make this practice of migrant labor that is so ingrained into the American economy by this point, if they make it illegal, will people stop coming? Will those jobs actually be filled by Americans? And the answer is no. This flow of workers continues. The need for these workers continues, and so the flow of those workers continues. The difference now is that it's not authorized by the government. And a lot of them, instead of go back and forth across this border, which is now technically illegal, end up just staying in the United States.
So what happens is that the undocumented population grows, starting loosely speaking in early 1970s.
By the end of the 80s, there's 4 million undocumented people living here. Many of them are filling the demand for jobs that brought them here in the first place. A very real demand on farms, in construction, in restaurants. 4 million undocumented people living in the United States. Congress sees this as a growing problem, so they decide to get tough on immigration. Congress wants to enforce immigration limits in a firm, unambiguous manner. They pass laws in the 80s and 90s to physically fortify this long, porous border. Physical barriers, more guards, incentives to leave, disincentives to enter. Okay, so this first test that they ran back in the 60s didn't work. Will this work? And the answer is no.
People say, oh, this might be my last chance to cross. I better cross, and I better, as soon as I can, I better bring my family with me.
In fact, more people come because, again, there's jobs here. There's jobs to be filled. There are corporations who have become totally reliant on these workers. So soon, some of these migrant workers are now not so migrant. They're having families here. They're living lives. They're paying taxes. They're integrating into communities. They're American. By the end of the 2000s, there's 10 million. But they don't have legal status. They're not technically authorized. And in fact, no matter how important they are to certain industries, there's no path for them to gain legal status. They're in this limbo. Look at this chart. These are farm workers in the United States. These two lines are for people who are either born in the United States or legally here. And this line are unauthorized immigrants, the people we've been talking about this whole time. Now watch what happens. The undocumented population is around 3 to 4% of the entire American population. But look at how fundamental they are to just the crop farm work industry. This is the food we eat being processed by people who are not authorized to be in the country. Oh, and by the way, it's not just agriculture. Landscaping, household workers, laundry services. Again, 3 to 5% of the population, but a quarter of this workforce.
This is an example of the gap between what the legal system provides and what seems to be what the economy needs to function at a high level.
I once worked at a restaurant as a line cook here in DC. It was my first job when I got out of college, actually. And every single person in that kitchen was an unauthorized immigrant who worked usually 2 jobs cooking food for restaurants. Now, I want to dwell on one point that I kind of mentioned, but is incredibly important, which is that normally policy would recognize this. Oh, there's a need for low-wage work in the United States. Let's make a legal pathway so people can come in and we can sort of control this. But immigration in the United States is kind of like this room with 4 doors. Each door is a legal path into the United States. If you're a high-wage worker who has like a advanced degree or whatever, you can get in through this door, though that's a nightmare in and of itself. You can get sponsored by family who are here legally. You can play the lottery, where less than 1% of those apply get status. And then there's the asylum refugee door for those fleeing danger or persecution. What a government that oversees an economy that is reliant on migrant labor might do is make a 5th door, a door for low-wage workers who do all of these vital jobs that we all rely on. But there is no door. There's no door for construction workers, farm workers, restaurant workers, hotel cleaners.
Most Americans think that if you're a good person who's been following the law relatively well, paying your taxes, and contributing to the community, can just simply apply for citizenship.
No, that is not how it works.
The lawful pathways to come to this country have never really been able to satisfy the demand for workers. And so there are workarounds for that.
So today we have this huge population of people, over 10 million, who are in limbo. They've lived here for a long time, they work here, they fulfill important jobs. They're only about, again, 3 to 4% of the population. And by the end of like the 90s, remember that chart that showed like how reliant our food system is on this labor? Instead of focusing on like mass deportation and trying to kick everyone out, there was actually some political appetite to give these people a pathway to be here legally, a recognition that we need them. Let's let them not live in the shadows anymore. George Bush was our guy on this.
Every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less American.
George Bush was in the middle of sort of negotiating sort of a new comprehensive immigration reform that would have legalized a lot of the undocumented immigrants at the time, greater pathways for labor migration.
It was looking very hopeful for these 10+ million people in limbo, but then something happened.
A plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
All of a sudden, it became impossible to talk about immigration without thinking about security issues.
It's now my privilege to sign the Homeland Security Act of 2002.
The 19 men who carried out 9/11 were in the United States legally. And so now there was a microscope on how the immigration system let this happen because it was so insecure. All of Bush's efforts towards make America more American, all of that took a massive U-turn.
And so there's this language of criminality that gets attached to immigration and especially undocumented immigration.
Congress creates this new department, it's Homeland Security. They get rid of this benign-sounding Immigration Naturalization Service, and in its place, Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The country was reeling after 9/11, and a more militarized, security-focused version of immigration, border protection, was one of the ways we felt more safe. When we decided to cover this story about immigration, I reached out to all of you to ask what angles you're most curious about. What do you feel like you're not getting from the news? And I heard a lot of you tell me that you feel overwhelmed, confused, even sort of anxiety induced by the news, by your news feed. I feel that too in today's news cycle. This is why my team and I have been working on creating a new space to interact with these topics that is more about understanding and dialogue than it is about the kind of attention-grabbing, anxiety-inducing nature of our current media. This is what New Press is. Our main goal is to make our reporting more transparent and to make your experience consuming our journalism more empowering, more focused on understanding and less focused on fear and sensationalism. Help us change the way journalism is done and consumed. That's kind of the goal. And thanks to everyone who contributed your thoughts and questions to this story to make it better. All right, it's after 9/11. What happens next? So ICE is created after 9/11, and this is when we start to expand the use of detention centers, like immigration jails. Wait, but I thought ICE just deported people? If someone is found to be here illegally, unauthorized, why not just deport them? And the answer is the U.S. Constitution. The Fifth Amendment, which says that every person here is entitled to due process of the law. Every person, not every citizen. Every person gets a trial. They get their day in court to represent themselves, and we got to abide by it. It's the rule of law here in the United States. Though that's kind of being stress tested at the moment, as we will see in a minute. Anyway, my point is that detention centers are, in many cases, where migrants awaiting their hearing and their trials are held. They're jails. Did you know that there's a difference between prisons and jails? Jails are just meant to hold people temporarily while they await some process. Prisons are meant to punish people with being convicted for a crime. Detention centers are kind of supposed to be like jails. They are supposed to be temporary and not a punishment. Okay, so now we are post 9/11. ICE exists. It's a new era of immigration. And since the creation of these agencies, Congress hasn't passed any major immigration reforms. It's been up to the president to enforce the laws that exist, that were made all those years ago. So let's see how Obama chooses to do this.
I believe that we can be a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants.
That quote kind of sums up how Obama did it. He wanted to pass laws around immigration and actually make like some legal form for people to have a pathway to citizenship or to permanent status. But he also wanted to show that he wasn't soft on immigration. And in fact, he soon becomes known as the Deporter-in-Chief, a nickname that he earns by deporting a lot of people. He deported a lot of people just at the border who were coming, but then he also used ICE to deport people from the interior. And Obama was really all about focusing on criminals, people who were actually like a threat to society.
And let's be honest, tracking down, rounding up, and deporting millions of people isn't realistic. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security. Felons, not families. Criminals, not children.
This is something I didn't know before reporting this story, and it's super important. During this time, the principal way that ICE would find people to deport wasn't just going in and like raiding a workplace.
In order to understand ICE operations, you have to understand that historically speaking, for the last 20, 30 years, the primary source of ICE arrests has been people who are held in local jails or state jails or federal jails.
ICE would rely on the local police in some town. There might be a lot of undocumented immigrants in this town, some of whom have criminal records. But this one got arrested and is at the local police station. They call ICE. ICE goes over, picks them up. But over time, local police stations started to push back on this. They're like, hey, we're local law enforcement. We're not like immigration enforcement. It created all this mistrust in these communities where now people without status would be afraid of the local police because a small run-in with the police could mean deportation. So some police departments stop playing ball when they have someone in custody who doesn't have immigration status. These are called sanctuary cities. I'm gonna be totally frank. I used to think sanctuary cities were like cities where immigrants could come and there would be zero like immigration enforcement at all, and that like ICE couldn't come into. I now understand it for what it is, which is they're cities where local law enforcement treats undocumented immigrants like anyone else. They don't hold on to undocumented immigrants for even longer just so that ICE can come pick them up. If they can make bail, they get to go, just like anyone else would. So Obama's deporting tons of people, and meanwhile, there's a larger conversation happening around immigration. Part of that conversation led by this guy.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems. You can call it whatever the hell you want. They're gone.
Trump runs a campaign that is highly antagonizing of immigrants, really framing them as criminals, and he wins. One of the first things he does is he changes how ICE can arrest people. Instead of them focusing on people who are in police custody already or who have a criminal record, ICE is now authorized to pick up anyone who they find along the way who might be here illegally. This is called collateral enforcement,
where you have officers going after people not because they are a high priority, but because there are more of them than the people that are high priorities.
This is kind of, I think, when a lot of us learned what ICE even was. ICE raids become much more visible under the first Trump presidency.
Nearly 24 law enforcement agents surrounded this suburban Texas home.
Raided convenience stores, checking papers.
Arrest more than 100 people at once.
ICE officials said operations like these are a harbinger of what's to come.
The other big theme of Trump's first presidency is how he got shot down by the courts over and over. He tried to do this Muslim ban, and the judicial branch, which is the courts, found it illegal, and he tried to tweak it, and they found it illegal, and he wasn't able to fully exercise his vision on immigration because a lot of what he wanted to do was technically illegal. He tried to cut federal funding from these sanctuary cities. Once again, it's found illegal by the courts. He's not allowed to do it. He tries to end the program called DACA, which gives protected status to a few 100,000 people who came here as children, but once again, blocked by the courts. So you can kind of see that Trump V1 was not very successful in this sort of widespread crackdown on immigration that they envisioned because they didn't have their legal house in order. They were pursuing things that were just blatantly illegal. But they would learn from this. Trump's policy architects would learn from all of these mistakes, and they would be ready next time. But here comes Biden.
The President-elect of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
Biden wins, and boom, look at this graph. People are coming to the border, partly because the notoriously anti-immigrant president is now out of office. And that's what this chart is.
You had people showing up the border truly believing that Biden had said any migrant could come here, but also because COVID destabilized the economic situation in a lot of South America. And the United States survived COVID economically better than any other country in the world.
Many of them are deported, but for logistical and diplomatic and legal reasons, many are released into the United States while they wait for a hearing. Remember this status? At the same time, Biden also keeps a Trump policy that expels many new immigrants without even processing them, many of whom start making repeat crossings.
You had large numbers of people just crossing the border over and over and over again until they could get through. So the rate of repeat border crossings skyrocketed.
So a lot of these numbers are actually juiced by thousands of people getting turned back multiple times, same person, but they just keep coming.
Some say the new president gave them hope for a life in America.
And these images, this graph, becomes the central tool for Donald Trump's second run for president. The day he almost got assassinated, he's like showing the graph.
Take a look at that. And then the worst president in the history of our country took over. And look what happened to our country. Probably 20 million people. It's a massive invasion at our southern border.
The invasion at the border of our country.
Invasion of our country. Well, bad things are going to happen.
Check out this poll, which asks Americans if they think that legal immigrants are a, quote, major risk for committing a crime in the United States. In 2019, it's like somewhere between 15 and 20% of people who say that legal immigrants are going to commit a crime. By 2024, it's like double that. Like a third of Americans are now skeptical and afraid of legal immigrants.
We have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. They're having fistfights with our police officers right in the middle of streets.
14,944 have been convicted of homicide.
They're taking over the city. They're taking people's pets and killing them and eating them.
Okay, real quick. I almost had an entire section of this video that is like the deep dive, scientific evaluation of the data of the migrant crime connection. Is there a surge in crime committed by unauthorized immigrants, as the news is kind of making us feel? Instead of an entire section, because I think it will be slightly tangential, I'm going to give you the highlights. The answer is there is no question that people who are in this country without authorization sometimes commit crimes. But if you look at the data, not the news stories that are sensational and horrible, but the actual data, you will see something like this. Lots of studies that show that undocumented immigrants are far less likely to commit crimes than native-born Americans. They're half as likely to be in jail They commit violent crime at a meaningfully lower rate. In fact, there's even pretty robust studies that show that an increase in the foreign-born population is associated with less property and violent crime in a community. I'm going to put the link to the studies here and some of the stats in our sources so that you can go evaluate them for yourself. Okay, but most Americans aren't looking at the data. They're watching this.
A murder committed by a man in the country illegally.
From Peru.
An undocumented farm worker.
Another undocumented immigrant.
Accused in a gruesome crime.
So Trump rides this wave. It's like his central message in the 2024 presidential campaign. And he makes a big promise.
The largest deportation operation in American history. We have not.
And then he wins.
Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States.
I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before.
And this time, his people are ready.
In the first Trump administration, they kept losing. They had poorly drafted rules that judges struck down. And you learn from failure.
On his first day in office, Trump declares a national emergency on the border. He sends the military there, he freezes the refugee program, he suspends asylum, he revives an 18th century war law to justify deporting gang members. He makes it way easier to just deport people without due process, which you can do through some loopholing and some like maximalist reading of the law. No hearing. He directs immigration judges to look for anyone who is in this limbo waiting for an asylum hearing and to fast track deny them without a hearing to get them deported faster. He rolls back temporary protected status for a few 100,000 people, tells them it's time to go back to their country. He revokes student visas, and he offers $1,000 for any undocumented immigrant to self-deport. They literally call it a exit bonus, which sounds like a HR corporate America term, which I guess that's not surprising. He says that anyone who is meant to be deported and doesn't go will get a fine that is $1,000 a day. His goal is to deport 1 million people in his first year in office. But he has a problem. This chart. People, unsurprisingly, have stopped coming to the border. Now remember Obama, the deporter-in-chief? He deported tons of people, 400,000 people at the height. But a huge amount of those people were from the border. There's barely anyone coming to the border now. So to get his 1 million deportations this year, he needs to focus on the interior, all of this. In other words, he needs ICE.
Federal agents launched raids in one of the first visible signs of President Trump's mass deportation plan.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement will no longer avoid sensitive locations like schools and churches.
Now anyone is fair game for enforcement and to be detained and deported from the U.S.
If you're in the country illegally, you're on the table.
First things first, he once again revives this authority for ICE to pick up anyone they stumble across when they are doing an operation. Like if they're going after like a drug dealer that they know is an actual criminal, if they find anyone along the way that doesn't have papers and that they have a reasonable discretion to think that that person is gonna flee, they can detain them. But ICE doesn't have enough people for all of this at first. So Trump starts taking people from other agencies, other law enforcement agencies, thousands of federal workers from the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the U.S. Marshal Service, thousands of people doing important work of law enforcement now being reassigned to pick up unauthorized immigrants. And where do they turn? Anywhere they can. Restaurants.
They come in here with guns and then their faces are covered.
Factories.
Anxious relatives of employees waited for updates.
A child's birthday party, saying that they're targeting gang members, but detaining people as young as 3 years old.
It remains unclear how many of those arrested are actual gang members.
And they're not just focusing on strictly unauthorized, undocumented immigrants. They're arresting green card holders.
He is a legal resident. The agents took him to a cemetery and beat him several times.
They're deporting people to countries that they're not even from. They're deporting people who are following the rules and going to their hearings, who are entitled to due process by the Constitution.
ICE detained 20-year-old Dylan Contreras, a high school student, on May 21st after attending a mandatory immigration court hearing.
This is the chart of ICE arrests. Here's where Trump takes office. You can see how things spike. And this gets us back to Daniel.
Before him being elected, he was talking about sending all of the illegal criminals back to whatever country they were from. But in my mind, I wasn't illegal. I was legal. So, you know, to be honest with you, I didn't really take it too serious.
In March 2025, Daniel was detained. He was a green card holder, remember? Had been here since he was a kid. He was a business owner, an employer, but technically, he had a record.
I did get in trouble as a teenager. I found a little joint, marijuana in the vehicle.
So even though this was decades ago, didn't matter. He gets put into a detention center that is run by a private company while he awaits a hearing.
Food is really horrible. The milk is already spoiled. Like, as soon as you open it, like, you could smell it. Pieces of bread, it had mold. I lost 35 pounds in less than 2 months. Like, mentally, they were breaking me down. I said, I feel like I'm gonna die.
Immigration jails are wretched places to be, so much so that I don't think it's possible to have a fair immigration court process while you're detained, because so many people just don't have the psychological fortitude to maintain that for the months it takes to fight your case.
The showers were nasty. It would be flies, mosquitoes all over. The facilities are dirty. They don't give you no sheet covers. You sleep on the floors, on the, like, open ground, not no mattress. The officers would tell me, hey, listen, they tell us that you guys don't have no rights.
Now, hold on, due process still exists. Like, Trump hasn't destroyed the Constitution. Daniel had a really good case for being here. He had a green card. His wife is an American citizen.
I could have fought. I spent so much money on my lawyer, and I could have stayed there and fought for a year.
But this is actually the most pernicious part of the whole story. Even though he could have fought his case in front of a judge and probably won, his lawyer told him that to just work through that process would take months, maybe even longer than a year. But things were so bad in this detention center that he calculated that this was an unbearable amount of time.
The government and ICE know very, very well that it is in fact so punishing and awful for people to endure that they will often be forced into giving up their rights and simply agreeing to be deported.
The living conditions were so bad that I basically asked to get deported myself.
I talked to Daniel right after he had arrived to El Salvador, after being detained and then deported.
I'm still trying to adapt to the heat over here and the way people talk, because everywhere I go, they know that I'm not from here.
And I started to get really curious why he was a target. Green card holder, business owner, and then I put it together. It comes down to the numbers. Even after this huge initial crackdown right after Trump took office, they still weren't hitting their numbers. This is like way too hard. And this is when Stephen Miller, who's seen as the architect of Trump's immigration crackdown, gives ICE a quota.
We are looking to set a goal of a minimum of 3,000 arrests for ICE every day.
3,000 arrests a day. I don't actually know if that's a lot or little. I wanted to put this into perspective. So let's just sort of compare it to something else. Like New York's police department, they're pretty big. They probably do a lot of arrests a day. Well, it turns out they arrest about 700 people per day, and they have about 36,000 officers. This is officers, this is arrests. ICE has about 6,000 officers focused on their deportation efforts, and they have to arrest 3,000 people per day. Okay, that's a pretty big number.
And what we understand is that the pressure those line agents are feeling to make as many arrests as they possibly can is unimaginable.
So starting this summer, just a couple months ago from when I'm recording this, we started to see the results of that quota, of this pressure.
ICE detained him because they thought he was part of the protest and he was just driving through.
Why are you doing this?
A woman was arrested in front of her children as she was about to take them to school.
The chaotic face-off between federal agents outside the facility.
They broke his car window right there, pepper sprayed him in the car.
Let's go back to this graph that we started the video with. Remember our three colors: convicted criminals, people charged but not convicted, and then no criminal charges. That's this bottom line. Trump takes office here. All of the lines go up. Stephen Miller gives ICE their new quota here, and look which line goes up. To meet these quotas, ICE is leaning further and further into finding anyone they can justify deporting. And just recently, these lines crossed. Okay, but here comes the problem that we maybe could have predicted if we were listening to the first half of this story, which is the US economy needs these people. There are industries that rely on their work. And business owners, corporations, a key part of Trump's fans, start to get really angry that Trump is raiding their workplaces and deporting their workforce. So here he is coming out with a Truth Social post saying that his aggressive policies are taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being, quote, almost impossible to replace. Like, if you thought I was being like exaggerating about how vital these people are to certain industries, Donald Trump himself is corroborating that. Almost impossible to replace. That same day, there's an email that goes out to ICE supervisors telling them to stop it with the worksite enforcement operations. Stop with the worksite raids on agriculture, restaurants, and hotels. And it tells them to stop arresting non-criminal collaterals, jargon for the people you find along the way when you actually have a target. Let's see what happens next to our graph. Well, this line, arrests of immigrants without a criminal record, slows but continues to go up. They still have to meet their quota, and everyone is still a target.
Incluso me despierto a veces toda así con el corazón latiendo y le digo a mi esposo, yo creo que nos vinieron a buscar.
I talked to Maria, not her real name, who is one of these people that are now a target. She's been here for decades, she's raised a family here, she works, but now her life has been made impossibly anxious.
Ahorita sí es un caos completo porque, digamos, al salir, por ejemplo, yo tenía la sensación como estar vigilado, como perseguido.
Because now Maria is going through a massive rebranding by this administration.
You are, by definition, a criminal, and so therefore you are subject to deportation.
For years, this population was seen as necessary and legally allowed to enter and work. And then for decades, the government kind of just turned a blind eye, knowing that we needed them. But now, they are seen as criminals. Yes, there's the talk of the worst of the worst.
The American people don't want these criminals and dangerous individuals on our streets anymore.
But it's not about that. I mean, look at this line. No criminal record. The administration is undergoing a reassociation to rebrand this giant population of people as every one of them a criminal, every one of them fair game to be detained and deported.
Le soy sincera que no he dormido. Digamos, por ratos duermo, por ratos no. A mi hija, la mayor, ella me dice, mami, no te preocupes, me dice, si nos tenemos que ir, pues nos vamos. Pero la verdad, soy honesta que, pues sí, allá están mis padres y todo, pero no fue tan fácil estar aquí.
Is this new? Like, I was struggling to frame this in history. Like, how unprecedented or different is this? And then I found this quote that says, the theory that immigration is responsible for crime, that all newcomers should be regarded with an attitude of suspicion, is a theory that is almost as old as the colonies. Okay, how do you fact check that? But then I realized that this report was written in 1931. Those words were written in 1931. Like, even back then, 100 years ago, people knew how powerful of a trick this is, how easy it is to brand outsiders as criminals.
We are not going away. We are staying here to liberate this city from socialist, burdensome leadership.
Families showing up for immigration hearings, being detained by ICE agents right after.
2 people pepper sprayed outside the ICE facility.
Federal agents slamming a 79-year-old business owner to the ground.
A mother to the ground.
ICE agents shoot and injure a woman.
Homeland Security says its operations are about immigration laws, not instilling fear.
So, here's where we're at. Congress has just passed this law that will juice ICE's budget. I mean, look at that chart again. We're about to see a much more resourced version of this crackdown. The results will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives turned upside down. It will mean families ripped apart. It will mean communities ruptured. People who, yes, among them are some criminals, but that's not who they're targeting. I mean, that's at least what their own data says. And instead, an administration that is headed by the son of an immigrant is directing our government to kick out a huge number of people who, as we've seen, are a key part of our economy and our country.
Every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less, American.
Es bien frustrante, entonces mis padres me han dicho que mejor me regrese. Estoy entre la espada y la pared, porque sí me gustaría, o sea, como le dijera, ya me acostumbré aquí, pero es que si seguimos así no es vivir una vida.
The only way to really stop migration is to make the United States no longer a desirable destination for migrants. And as Trump pushes this message of Fortress America, a world in which if you cross illegally, we might send you to be imprisoned in El Salvador on false claims of gang membership, people are not viewing the United States as the beacon of freedom that they once did.